everybody, this is Michelle Fox and welcome back to The Simple Quilter. Now today's topic comes from a subscriber who asked me to do a video on leaders and enders. Now I've been using leaders and enders since I first learned to start quilting close to 30 years ago. So leaders and enders have probably actually been being used for as long as the sewing machine's been out. I'm sure that this is not a new concept because, like I said, I learned it 30 years ago. Now, in the comments below, be sure to tell me if you use leaders and enders or if you don't. I'd love to know if you do or if you don't. If you have any other comments about leaders and enders, please put those in the comments. Okay, so the concept of a leader and ender is to sew onto a piece of fabric, which is your leader, before you enter your project. Now there are several reasons why we use leaders and enders, and I'll go over each of those. And then the ender is the piece that follows the sewn piece that you're working on. So this is my bucket of leaders and enders. And most of the time it's pretty full because I just use my scrap pieces and I toss them in there. So let's get started on the 8 reasons to use leaders and enders. The first reason you want to sew with the leader and ender is to help control these threads, these long threads that you're seeing right here. Because when you sew directly onto a leader and ender, directly onto a project using a leader and ender, you don't have those loose threads. There's just simply no loose thread. It's just right there. So that's the first thing. And then when you're coming off of those, there's no long thread. So that's the first reason why I use this, is simply to keep all those loose threads under control. Okay, the second reason I use a leader and ender is to help that fabric, especially triangles, especially when you're using triangles, to not get pulled down into the machine. Let me show you. See, it's pulled right down into there. Let me show you. See, there's just a tangled mess. Can you see that tangled mess? Just a tangled mess there. So when you use a leader and an ender, that doesn't get pulled down in there. See how nice that works? See, there's no pulling of the fabric down into the throat plate. Now the third reason that I use a leader and ender is that the thread doesn't get nested on the back of your project. And let me show you what I mean. Now this got pulled down in there and nested. But you can see that little bird nest on the back of the fabric there. Okay, so when you use a leader and ender, that doesn't happen. You don't have that problem. Okay, so when you use a leader and an ender, that thread doesn't get nested on the back of your project there. So you can see how nice the stitches are. There's no nesting. So that's the third reason. No nesting is the third reason that I use the leaders and enders. Now the fourth reason to use leaders and enders is simply to keep your needle from becoming unthreaded. I'm not going to demonstrate that simply because I don't want to rethread my machine, but if your thread is just loose and you've cut it too short, oftentimes the needle will become unthreaded. The fifth reason is you can just use these pre-cuts as leaders and enders, and you could easily make 4 patches and use that, or you could even use charm packs. Here's a white one and a printed one. You could just stack those up, have those ready in stacks, and you could be working on 2 quilts at once. So that's just a good way to use your scraps. But it doesn't have to be pre-cuts. Here's a bag of 5-inch squares. Well, some of these are pre-cuts, but now one of my favorite things to use are these little triangles that I've cut off after snowballing a block. I have a few of these. However, I did learn that if you sew them before you cut them, it's a whole lot easier. I have several bags of those, but you can see here that you can use triangles for leaders and enders also. Okay, because you're not always having these long pieces of thread, you're not always wasting that since you're sewing back to back with just a tiny space in between. That saves on your thread, which in turn saves on money. Another thing, when you use leaders and enders, you don't have to deal with all these long loose threads. So since your threads are relatively short, just a few little centimeters in between blocks, that saves money because you're not using as much thread. Now, it also saves time because you're not having to deal with these long threads and trim them off and pick them off the floor and pick them off you and get them thrown away. So that's just a fast and easy way to sew your blocks together. So reason 6 and 7 would be just to save time and money. Now, the 8th reason is just to use scraps, because it's just a great way to use up your scraps. This is my little leader and ender box, and look at all those little scraps. It didn't just get thrown in the trash. And if you want to work on a quilt, you can use your scraps here, or again, those triangles that I talked about just a few minutes ago. So it's number 8 would be that it's a great way to use your scraps. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, please share with a friend, and as always, leave a comment. I love to get those comments, and I try to reply to each and every one. So until next time, have fun quilting.